With me today is Pei Yan Heng, who is not only a member of the Beta Change team, she's also a mathematics and science teacher in Singapore's Ministry of Education. And she spends a lot of time diving around the beautiful islands that she calls home. So we wanted to ask her to come on today and talk a little bit about what Earth Day means and how we can impact it as people, and especially as people with diabetes. So Pei Yan has a lot of experience with marine life, and she's going to shed some really valuable light on how we impact those issues. So welcome, Pei Yan. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. My name is Pei Yan, as Katie has mentioned, and I'm from Singapore. I've been living with type 2 diabetes for 21 years, and I'm actually a full-time teacher, teaching mathematics and science. And as Katie has mentioned, out of my free time, I actually spend quite a bit of time doing marine stuff, marine conservation projects, surveys, and collaborations with all the scientists and researchers. And yeah, so I'm quite involved in the environmental aspect as a volunteer. Yeah.
That is awesome. Okay, so Pei Yan, today we're going to talk about a couple of issues like waste that results from having diabetes, some personal stories that we have about dealing with our own waste from diabetes, and what we hope that we can change to take better care of our Earth, especially during this Earth Week. So why don't we get started with why do we choose to celebrate Earth Day? So Earth Day started in 1970, and the Earth Day Network declares that it works to broaden the definition of what environment means to include issues that affect our health and our communities, like greening deteriorated schools, creating green jobs and investment, and promoting activism to help stop air and water pollution. So why is this important? Well, Pei Yan and I talked about why we care about this issue, and it's because we live in a world of constant change. So science is showing that our behavior really impacts the speed and extent of that change. And there are many ways that life with diabetes affects this as well. So we have waste that comes from changing our pump site. We have waste that comes from testing our blood sugar. We have waste that comes from disposing of sharps or using anything plastic. So Pei Yan, why don't we start off with some of this waste and how that impacts things like marine life?
Good question, Katie. Marine trash, let's talk about our plastic waste. So plastic waste, if you discard it into a trash bin and it gets picked up by the garbage truck, it gets sent to the landfill, or it gets incinerated in the case of Singapore, and then the ash gets transported to a landfill. But there are some instances whereby you don't discard your plastic waste properly and it ends up in our drainage system, or this drainage system actually leads to the sea, and at the end, it becomes a marine trash and it kills and strangles marine animals. Yeah, it's quite sad.
Yeah, and it affects, that in turn affects a lot of people, right? So I know that sometimes when we are consuming our food, being at the top of the food chain, we sometimes reap the results of what we put into the water, right?
Yes, exactly. So because plastic hardly decompose and they stay around in almost like complete form of hundreds and thousands of years, some plastic eventually gets broken down, gets broken off into tiny, smaller plastics, which we call microplastics. And this microplastic actually enters into the food system, the food chain of our marine animals. So the digestive systems of our marine animals. So animals like fishes, prawns, when they eat and they feed off, whatever they have in this ocean, they consume the microplastics as well. So what currently scientists have found that our seafood supply contains quite a substantial amount of plastic in it. So in fact, whatever we have discarded has come back to us. We're actually consuming plastic materials.
And Pei Yan, when you went, I know, for example, you went diving this weekend, right? Can you talk about some of those effects that you've seen, maybe in marine life that you've observed when you're diving, or in other ways, in your experience of this kind of those really dramatic results maybe?
One example that I can give, like a few examples that I can give, one of which is that sometimes when I do surveys, we do find irresponsibly discarded fishing nets, and that is considered like a marine trash. And because it's discarded irresponsibly and nobody takes care of it, marine animals, they can't differentiate what is trash and what is not trash. And many often we do find a lot of animals getting trapped in those discarded nets, and they die. And the other example I could give is coral bleaching. So with all this production of plastics, it has increased the effect of climate change, and corals are getting bleached waves after waves, and the climate change effect has actually shortened the recovery period between each coral bleaching event, and many of the corals actually are not able to recover in time before the next bleaching event. And when this affects the health of the reef, and it's a vicious cycle, and when the reef's health starts to decline, it affects the whole marine ecosystem, and the marine animals need the coral reef to survive and live healthily. Yeah.
And Pei Yan, some of these results that you mentioned, we might not even see the full effect of them in our lifetime, right? It might take a long time for some of these, the results of this behavior to be felt in the ecosystem.
Yes, you're right. For example, like climate change, it isn't like a one-day event, like suddenly, temperature started rising or weather getting a bit chaotic and wrong. It's actually a long period of human changes and effects to the environment. So we can't some things we can't see it instantaneously, and we only feel it like many years down the road, or perhaps only our future generation will feel the effect of our doings.
Yeah. Wow. That's really crazy. And as Ashley said, she sees coral bleaching with the Great Barrier Reef, and that's something that's talked about quite often, I think, or reported on quite often in the media. But, it's really mind-boggling to try to get your head around the fact that a lot of these results that we might not even affect, but it might come in future generations. And one other question that Ashley had was about, is there anything that we could do to minimize our waste? So Ashley, we're going to actually tackle that very shortly. First, we're just going to go into a little bit about some themes of Earth Day that relate to diabetes and how we can address those. So hang tight. We will get to that in just a minute. So Pei Yan, one of the themes of this year's theme for Earth Day is environmental and climate literacy. And one of the billion acts of green that is being promoted is to stop using disposable plastic. So do you think that's something that's even possible for people with diabetes? I mean, we deal with so much plastic, right? Test strips, Lancets that are plastic, CGM, accoutrements that are plastic, pump sites, pumps themselves. What do you think about that, and how can we reduce that? So that's kind of what Ashley was getting at, but we're just going to talk about the general use of our plastic first.
Yeah. Very much agree with you, Katie. Yeah, sometimes I do really feel guilty about using so much plastic from my diabetes products, but it can't be helped because we need all these products to keep us going and live on a daily basis. So what I do is I try and minimize my plastics usage in my daily life with other stuff. So for example, if you can have your own water bottle to work instead of buying bottled waters. Okay, have your own water bottle, or if you're going to a coffee house, you can bring your own your recyclable tumbler and then get it marked and get it filled up in a coffee house or coffee place. And what I do sometimes is that I avoid using disposable utensils. So what I do is I have my own utensils at work. So I have my own set and even my bowls and plates, so that I avoid using when I need to do takeaways or when I just need to make my own food. I try and avoid using plastic materials, and instead I use reusable materials, so containers that can be washed easily and reuse it again. Yeah, that will help actually minimize our plastic footprint slowly.
And that's something that I think most people can get behind, is using reusable containers. And I think that just something that you can keep in mind, or bringing not only reusable containers but reusable bags to the grocery store. That's something that is discussed quite often, is the use of plastic bags and how we can use that. So it's almost like we're trying to offset the use of plastic in one aspect of our lives, which is diabetes, with by using less plastic in other ways, right? Is that what you think? I think that's it seems like that's a good way to start.
Yeah, and hopefully in the future, the companies can start making plastic-friendly diabetes products, or biodegradable plastic products for our diabetes usage.
Yeah,
that's what I hope. Yeah,
I hope so too.
Yeah.
I think so too. And I think that, something that you briefly touched on is disposing of trash properly, and, trying to avoid trash that gets washed into drainage systems, and also, treating the rest of our environment safely by safely disposing of sharps. Because I know that it's hard to always dispose of every syringe and every pump site and every lancet correctly. But when we don't, it can have really drastic effects on people and animals and anything else that comes into contact with that, right?
Yes, correct. And I think that Ashley's comment about sorting out our trash is also very important. So maybe the companies can label clearly, what are the products that can be recycled and what are paper products, and then we can sort it out properly and then get it recycled. And that's our effort that's both the company's effort and our effort to actually reduce the amount of plastic that needs to be produced each year.
Yeah, and I do think it is a team effort, really, because, I think that we can ask these companies to be more forthcoming about what is in their products, how we can dispose of them. I know that, in the sustainability practices that are listed for a lot of major diabetes companies like Medtronic, Novo Nordisk, Sanofi, Eli Lilly, there's a lot of discussion about corporate sustainability and how, the manufacturing of these products can be done in a more sustainable way. But I also think that it's important for consumers to know how to properly dispose of things and know what is in the product that they're buying. What do you think about that?
Exactly. So I noticed that the companies that you mentioned, the policy, the sustainability policy revolves much around how the company is sustainable in their practices and work. But maybe it's time now to move towards consumer products, and how do we make them more sustainable and more environmentally friendly. So the overall arching focus is not just to reuse and recycle products, but also reduce the amount of plastic products that we can reduce in the future. Yeah,
I agree. I think that, we can all talk about that more, and I feel like it can be part of a greater conversation that all of us as consumers have. And Pei Yan, something I was wondering is, as a science teacher, what conversations do you have with your students about climate change and about, treating the earth properly?
Well, climate change is kind of ties in nicely with some of the contents that I teach. So, for example, we are talking about energy. There's burning of, which links to burning of fossil fuel. That I can bring up discussions about how burning of fossil fuel actually creates an impact on the environment, and it eventually leads to climate change. So, although I do provide a broad understanding of what climate change is, but I do share with them as well about my knowledge and what I have experienced before with regards to climate change. So things like marine trash, or the effects of climate change on coral bleaching and how it affects the whole marine ecosystem. Yeah, I do talk to them about that and let them know.
And do you think they take you seriously, like when you discuss like the severity of this? Do you think that they do listen and kind of take that to heart?
I think at that age, not everybody understands what exactly climate change is. Some of them are a bit more scientific literate, so they do know the consequences and implications of climate change, and they are a bit more, they have think deeper into it. But some of them, the rest of students are just taking it at superficial level, so they think that because they have not experienced it, so it doesn't affect them, that kind of mentality.
Yeah, I find that interesting because I think that it kind of can impact everyone differently. So I feel like the way that people can relate to it, changes across different experiences. And for anyone that's tuning in, please feel free to comment with any thoughts or questions that you have for Pei Yan and I to bring up during our discussion. We'd love to hear from you. So Pei Yan, one of the options that we touched on for ways that we can better improve our world is being involved in environmental projects. So have you been involved in any kind of environmental projects? Could you talk a little bit about that?
I've been involved in a few. So apart from helping the government agencies and some civil society groups to do marine surveys, we do collaborate with them as well, and we take note of any effects on our marine life, especially the coral bleaching events, and we do help to survey the effect on how wide the corals have bleached or how badly the corals are bleaching. And also I'm also involved in the international coastal cleanup for the Singapore side, so we do help to partly play our part in keeping our coast clean for marine trash, because the trash do end up somewhere and mostly it hits the beaches and the ocean. So we do try and educate, conduct coastal cleanup sessions for people or for schools, and then get people to be involved in environmental projects. And also I'm also involved in public education and public outreach events. So from there, roadshows, we do share with members of the public about the biodiversity that we have and some of the impacts that the biodiversity is experiencing because of human behaviors.
Wow, that's amazing, Pei Yan. That's great. Kudos to that, because I think it's great that you're involved in so much work on that front. I think, my latest act of environmental sustainability was picking up a plastic bag that I found floating in some water today. But I think that any little bit counts, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be on a large scale. It's like you can just dispose of your trash properly, and that's huge. Yeah. So, like, for example, your kayaking event activity, if you do see plastic products, you can help by just picking it up and then bring it back to shore and disposing it properly. Everybody's little effort helps. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So one question we had come in was, do we think it's a worry that some of our country's leaders deny that climate change is even happening? I would say yes, it is a huge worry. What about you, Pei Yan?
Yes, that is really a huge worry, because a climate change event is not just specific to a particular location. It affects the whole world, and globally, all the countries' leaders must come together to think of solutions to help tackle climate change. It's not like half of the globe does efforts to fight climate change, but the other half of the globe doesn't do anything, or it doesn't help in the efforts to improve this climate change situation.
I agree. I think that it's something that we all need to address together, and I think different people are impacted by climate change differently, but I think that the effects of it are indisputable. There is evidence for this, and I certainly don't think that any good can come from humans eating marine life that has eaten our plastic that we dispose of in the ocean. And I think. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. And on this note, I would just like to, have a big appreciation to all these non-governmental organizations and all the civil society groups for helping in their efforts to fight for climate change and make the world a better place and reduce the impact. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your work. Definitely. So Pei Yan, what do you think we can say to kind of wrap up? So as I actually said, we only have one planet Earth, which we need to keep in mind. We don't get a second chance, to go about this the right way. So for people with diabetes, what can we do better? Could we maybe come up with 3 things that we could end up with?
I would say start small. So maybe you make a change in your daily, the way you use plastic products in your daily life. Maybe not so much with the diabetes product at the moment, but you start to improve your daily habits. And each of us, when we make a change, that rolling effects makes a bigger change to the world.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think, I think that, making one small change, whether it's, making sure you dispose of your sharps properly or starting a sharps container at your house. I think that can be one really big change that people can do easily. Maybe being aware of what you do with your recyclables, choosing to recycle rather than throwing them in the trash. That's another one. And for a third one, I feel like what we said before, just any of those things, like picking up trash that you see, just like not leaving it there. And, keeping in mind that these big statistics, right? Like, 300 million tons of plastic are made each year, recycled, kind of reducing that number to something that is individual, we can all do to sort of make a difference in our communities. So that's great. Well, Pei Yan, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I think it was a really great conversation to kick off Earth Week. So Earth Day is April 22nd, everyone out there. So, look around for something that you can do in your community and, try to keep in mind things that you do every day that have an impact on the environment and, what can we do better, because we are all in this together. Pei Yan, do you have any comments to close out our discussion tonight?
Just one sentence. Everybody can do our part to protect the Earth.
Yep, and I think that's great. Well, thank you so much, Pei Yan, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Katie, for inviting me.